Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be taking a look at Rembrandt Watercolors. I want to give a huge thanks to Tonya over at Scratchmade Journal, who recently received these Rembrandt Watercolors from Royal Talents to review for her own blog, and she very kindly offered to pass along a few of the little samples to me to review on this channel as well. And I have to say that she was rather genius using this little Eclipse gum tray as a palette for her paints. After it was empty with gum, she put the little paint in the walls and sent it on over that way. So I just thought that was really smart and wanted to share that all with you. Today we are going to be doing a bit of a visual overview of these paints, but I highly recommend checking out Tonya's blog for a detailed written account of these paints as well. I will put a link in the description below and definitely recommend checking out her blog for this and tons of other watercolor resources. Rembrandt is the artist's grade line of watercolors made by Royal Talents, who also makes the student line of Van Gogh, which I'm a huge fan as far as student grade paints are concerned. Van Goghs are heavily pigmented, easy to re-wet, and vibrant on the paper, and their artist line with Rembrandt is no exception. These paints are, from what I gather, quite commonly available in Europe, but they're less common and more expensive here in the US. Now I have to admit that this video gave me quite a bit of trouble in the recording stage. I think I've recorded at least 5 or 6 hours of footage over the past week, and I just haven't been happy with any of my samples or my commentary. That has entirely to do with me and not necessarily the paint. I am admittedly a bit rusty after not doing proper reviews during the World Watercolor Month, but I really wanted to try and figure out how to put a new spin on a review to make it a bit more interesting and to get me a bit more focused on what I needed to accomplish. And then I remembered a post that I saw on Instagram a couple weeks ago from Becky Page, who I'll also link in the description below. She swatched out some of her new watercolors on these beautiful little rock sketches instead of on traditional swatch cards, and I just completely fell in love with them. With her permission to borrow her idea for this video, I was super excited to go ahead and try some of these little swatches for myself, and I just completely adore them. So before the recording, I drew out some rocks and cute little mushrooms and made sure I had the correct number of objects for the number of samples that I wanted to paint. Then I went over them with my micron pens and made sure to add shading and details within each shape. The wonderful functionality of these little sketches is that the textural lines actually provide opacity tests, while the shape of them will allow me to paint with different amounts of pigment and shading to give me a better idea of how they would perform in an actual painting versus simply on a swatch card. Overall, they're really bright and intense, but they can appear rather opaque in heavier concentrations. However, when they dry over these lines, they don't actually seem that opaque, even though they have this heavier feel to them. Tonya goes into detail about this on her blog about the use of brighteners, so I definitely recommend checking that out because it was definitely new information for me and I found it pretty valuable. And then we finally get to the reason that this video took so long to reach you. When it came to doing a painting demo for you, I had so much trouble. Not because of the paints necessarily, but because of my own painting funk. I used to say when I was younger that I didn't really get to decide when I could draw something well, my hands did, or in other words, that some days would just be way more productive than others when it came to trying to produce something that looked good. As I became a working artist as a job, I of course have to push through that for the most part, and I've been pretty successful, but there are just some days where I cannot come up with anything worth wanting to show all of you. So anyway, I do have two kind of meh looking samples in photographic form to show you. One was on Canson XL watercolor and the other paper was on Strathmore paper, and they had quite different results. On the cheap Canson watercolor paper, when used in strong concentrations, some of the colors dry with this shiny finish that actually remind me a lot of the Kuretake Ganze Tambi paints. And on cotton paper, I had a hard time getting consistent coverage, though I do think that this has to do more with the specific Strathmore paper than it does with the paints. The paper is super absorbent and requires a lot of water to spread evenly, which you can't really achieve with a liner brush like I was trying to do for this jellyfish. I did finally come up with a little demo for you of some quick little jellyfish on Fluid 100 hot press paper, which I knew would let the water kind of sit on the paper more and float around before sinking in. And I wanted to show you this because of how the Rembrandts react with water. They have this incredible wild movement, which can either be a pro or a con depending on your style. If you prefer to have control over these paints, I'm just going to say that these paints probably are not for you. If you like wild, expressive strokes, then go ahead and dive on in. Tonya also goes into detail on her blog about how they react with different types of papers. She found that they perform best on Saunders Waterford paper, which is really able to capture the spirit of these paints and let them shine through. For this little painting, I used the Permanent Red Deep, the Gamboge, and the Prussian Blue for the water behind it, and then I finished it off with some color pencils and some white gel pens for the little tentacles. For those of you who prefer my traditional swatches, I'm going to wrap up this video with comparisons to other brands. I won't talk about each and every one of them, but I did want to point out a couple of things that caught my attention. The lemon yellow is made from PY 184 instead of PY 3 or Daniel Smith's PY 175, which are the only other versions of lemon yellow I have seen, and PY 184 is typically referred to as bismuth yellow rather than lemon yellow. Half of their samples, so 8 out of the 16, are multi-pigment formulas, and even the yellow ochre, instead of using just PY42 or PY43, uses a combination of both. I don't know if this is a cost-saving mechanism or what, but it was just really interesting to see that they're both used in that formula. Their blues, on the other hand, are single pigment, and the Cobalt Cerulean and Ultramarine Deep are heavily granulating and very personable. However, I did find that the non-granulating pigments seem a little bit flat or a little less characteristic overall. I really like the Hooker Green Deep and the Prussian Blue, and the reds are quite vibrant and lovely as well. I hope that you enjoyed this look at Rembrandt watercolors, and if you did, please remember to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you aren't already to see more content. You can also hit the bell icon to get notifications for when I release new videos. I want to say thanks again to Tonya and Becky for the paints and creative swatch ideas, and I will see you all next time.